planned to bring down transatlantic airliners with liquid bombs, the plotters watched by Britain's MI5. But had the CIA blown the operation by getting a key suspect early without telling their closest ally? The target of the bomb plot is, of course, transatlantic airliners headed to the U.S. and in the U.S. government right up to President Bush and the CIA. Everybody is getting anxious about just how close this plot seems to be to coming to fruition. And the Pakistanis have actually moved on Rashid Rauf, the mastermind of this plot, and arrested, potentially at the CIA's behest, the kind of a key plotter in this transatlantic airline bomb plot.
And with Rashid Rauf now in Pakistani custody, is his arrest going to blow the operation?
This episode is sponsored by HP. Most people are not counter-espionage experts, but that won't stop them getting targeted by cyber criminals seeking to extract their secrets.
HP understands that approximately 4 in 10 UK businesses have reported cyber breaches in the past 12 months alone. That's why HP business laptops, desktops, and workstations bought directly on HP Store are secure straight out of the box with their endpoint security.
No more stressing about dodgy emails or unexplained pop-ups. HP's independently verified Wolf Pro security works alongside your existing security tools to protect your business users and reputation from malware and evolving cyber threats with your first click.
You don't need an alias or a secret hideout to stay safe. Just Wolf Pro security working tirelessly to protect your hard work. It's security that's built in, not bolted on.
Find out more about how HP can protect your business at hp.com/classified. Podcast listeners benefit from a 10% discount on all business PCs, printers, and accessories using the code TRIC10. Terms and conditions apply.
So Rashid Rauf is arrested between 7 and 8 p.m. in Pakistan, local time, on August 9th, 2006. That's early morning, 9-10 a.m. in Washington, about 2 or 3 in the afternoon in London. It's happened without the Brits knowing, as we said last time. The CIA tells the White House. Fran Townsend, who's the Homeland Security advisor, been pushing for more aggressive action, calls President Bush, who's at his ranch in Texas. He says he'll call Tony Blair, who's in holiday in Barbados at Cliff Richard's villa, as we discussed last time. But Townsend also wants to tell her British counterparts, so it doesn't kind of come from Blair to them. You know, you can see everyone knows that this is going to be an awkward conversation. So everyone's thinking like, I don't want them to find out from someone else. You know, that's the mood.
And I'd imagine that once this trickles down to the police,
oh yes,
in the United Kingdom, there's some frustration.
Unhappiness, I think, because it's evening in London on August the 9th. When word finally gets to the police at Scotland Yard, and they are furious. I mean, Andy Hayden, who's one of the senior police officers at the time, says it was a breaking of trust. Beneath him, Peter Clark, who's the head of counterterrorism, finds out when he's in his office at Scotland Yard, he seems to think they'd have at least 2 more days. And he immediately realizes this could compromise the operation. The problem is Rauf, as we'd said, is in contact with lots of people every day by email, text, phone. Ali had been waiting in an internet cafe for some communication from Rauf. In that, the regularity of the contact is part of the problem because it's immediately going to raise alarm bells, the fact that he's not there anymore. And I guess the possibilities are that they move ahead with the plot. You know, they could suddenly just try and get on a plane, or they could even, detonate the bombs somewhere else. Could they race to the airports? Could they destroy evidence as well, making it harder to prosecute, knowing that Rauf has been compromised, he'd been arrested? So police know they've only got hours, really, before this long, intense operation falls apart. So in New Scotland Yard, they put up whiteboards with the names of the suspects. They call in about 300 officers to come in and to help them basically deal with it.
And I guess worth reminding, in particular, American listeners, that MI5 does not have powers of arrest. So this is the sort of intelligence picture needs to get transferred to the police, who can then actually conduct the arrests.
That's right. And one of the problems is that they had to locate and arrest all the people they were worried about in a real hurry. And it's not when you'd normally do it, because normally you do these arrests, the counterterrorism arrests, in the early hours of the morning, like 4 or 5 a.m., when you know someone's going to be at home, probably, they'll be asleep. Now you're actually having to find them in the evening and arrest them when they're on the move. So it's chaos in the operations room at the police. The phones are ringing, communications are hard. You'd normally want armed police to be in on these arrests. That's because you don't know if they've got bombs or what they've got. And the slight difference in the UK is you need to prepare an armed arrest team to be there and to be ready, because most police in the UK are not armed. So you've only got surveillance teams out there. So that's also one of the challenges from them. They've got a surveillance team covering Ali and they've got one covering Sawa, and they actually see both Ali and Sawa heading both to Walthamstow. Sawa, remember, is in High Wycombe. And that felt potentially significant because you've got the two lead figures in the conspiracy don't always meet up, heading towards each other into the town hall. And the worry is obviously that what if they're moving fast with the plot? Is that the signal to go? So they're trying to get arrest teams out to meet them at Walthamstow town hall, but you haven't got arrest teams who can get there in time. So you've actually only got the surveillance teams who've been watching them, who are there at the time. And the arrest teams are having to come from other locations. They're kind of racing there. So it's all that sense of urgency. So they're actually going to do something which they don't normally do, which is prepare to use surveillance teams to do arrests. So normally you'd have a separate arrest team. As I said, they might have armed backup and everything else. But in this case, it's so urgent, they're going to have to bring in the surveillance teams. It's interesting because the two cars pull into the car park of Walthamstow Town Hall. The two men get out, greet each other. It's dark. Surveillance teams watching. They open the boot of one car. There is that worry, what's if there's explosives in the boot? What if they're weapons? Something appears to be passed. It's actually the martyrdom video, which had just been recorded a few hours earlier, which is being passed.
Sarwar, the quartermaster, is not going to be on the flights,
Exactly.
right?
So
So he's going to distribute the video.
Exactly.
The
So he's
videos.
been given the video that's just been made a few hours earlier. At that moment, they get arrested. And you're right, they don't put up a fight. Ali has a memory stick on it. Whose is it? He says it's mine. On it, he says his holiday destinations to America when asked, but it's got the list of flight plans that he'd taken in that internet cafe, as well as a to-do list about, which has got on the to-do list, clean batteries, perfect disguise, drink bottles, Lucozade, orange red, calculate exact drops of Tang. It was basically a to-do list of everything he needed to do. I mean, right down to 1.5 drops, 1 teaspoon Tang, 1 teaspoon orange, 12. It's the ingredients list to finally make the bomb.
Which feels like good evidence against him.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Doesn't it?
But they're going to pick up around about 24 suspects in all. And the police officer said, we had a list of people who needed to be arrested. We had pictures of them pinned to the wall. And when the last red dot went on the last man arrested and someone said, right, we've got him, there was a sigh of relief and half a cheer. But here's the problem. It's been rushed. And that's a problem not just for the police, but also the politicians.
Rushed.
Yeah.
What were they missing?
We'll come to that. That afternoon, Home Secretary John Reid, who we'd spoken about, had given a speech on national security, warning about the risks to it, probably because he had this plot in mind. That evening, he goes to Stamford Bridge. Do you know where Stamford Bridge is?
That is the bridge in London with the castle on it.
No, I think you're thinking about Tower Bridge, but
London Bridge.
London Bridge. Anyway,
London Bridge, it is confusing. I think
Stamford Bridge is not a bridge.
it's not a bridge. What is it?
It is the home of Chelsea Football Club.
Okay.
He is a Celtic fan, which is a Scottish team. And John Reid, who's Scottish, supports Celtic. They're playing Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. He's in the nice seats. He gets the first call just before half-time that he might need to come in. Then another call during half-time saying, go right now, the cars are on their way. And he's driven at pace through London to Whitehall, where government offices are.
If Kash Patel had been the FBI director at the time, they could have just had that meeting at the soccer game.
Because we should explain, Kash Patel, director of FBI, likes meeting his MI5 counterparts, or wanted to meet his MI5 counterparts at soccer games. This was according to
Or on jet skis.
Or on jet skis.
Yeah, or on jet skis. Or helicopter tours. So he doesn't like having office meetings.
He doesn't like office
this would have
meetings.
been good because John Reid wouldn't have had to leave the game.
No, because he could have talked to the FBI. If the FBI had been in town.
Could have just done it right there in the box.
Instead, in this occasion, this was a different time, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
He goes to London to what's called a Cobra meeting, which is the Cabinet Office briefing room, which is the kind of our equivalent of the Situation Room. 10 p.m. that night, Cobra meeting taking place, goes on till after midnight. At 2 a.m., the UK terror threat level is, for the first time ever since it got created a few years earlier, raised to the highest point, which is called critical, which means an attack is imminent. So it's a sign that they are really worried. And I can remember this because I was a journalist for the BBC. And it was one of the few times I got woken up in the middle of the night. There are a few times where you got woken up. Normally you get woken up at 5 a.m. when something big is happening. But this was like a kind of 4 a.m. wake up call going, threat levels going up. And it was all because that we got notice that the Home Secretary was going to give an imminent announcement of something big at the very first, moment of the morning. So the news desk woke me up because Cobra reconvenes at 5 a.m. Because the big problem, of course, is airport security.
Well, right. I guess because, at this point, you think you all of a sudden have a significant and potentially global threat from a new sort of explosive. Because at this point in time, for all of the sort of Gen Z types that are listening to The Rest is Classified, there was an era where you could just walk onto an aircraft with a bottle of water, right?
Yeah, sounds amazing.
It sounds amazing. And so now you actually have to adapt the rules.
Yeah.
And any incoming flight into the US, in theory, you want to make sure that it's screened for liquids or that there's no liquids that anyone's bringing on that haven't been screened.
Yeah. Because the problem is that you busted this group of plotters. And it's true, they've made these arrests, but it's what you can't see, which is the worry. You can understand this worry. You've got this cell. What if Al-Qaeda, what if Rauf, what if those bomb makers in Pakistan had given another completely compartmented, separate
and
cell?
you just haven't seen
You
it
haven't seen that. Let's say in France or in, Germany, they've given them a load of liquid bombs. And then suddenly they're seeing the arrests in the UK and they go,
Time to go.
Time to go.
Yeah.
So the big worry is you've got this cell, but you don't know what other cells are out there. So you have to instantly, without warning, because of course the CIA pushed the operation faster than people have wanted, just returning to that point, that you have to instantly institute effectively a global ban on liquids going into planes, particularly coming into the US or UK, but other countries as well. And it's August. It's the peak of holiday season as well.
Yeah,
So
everyone's
crazy.
Bush is at the ranch. Eliza Vanny and Buller's on vacation.
Yeah.
Tony Blair's in Barbados.
Yeah.
It's amazing anyone's working.
But because everyone's going on holiday,
Yeah.
all the poor people going on holiday. And it was, I can remember this. It was total chaos that day because suddenly, flights are getting stopped. People are being told they can't take any liquids on. People are throwing stuff away. People don't know the rules. And of course, the airlines and airports knew nothing about, it's not like they'd been pre-briefed on this because it was a really sensitive piece of intelligence about the plot that you weren't going to start telling people, oh, we know there's a bunch of people who could bring on liquid explosives. That's going to blow the thing. So from zero knowledge, you're having to tell the whole airline industry to stop liquids getting on planes.
I guess, though, it does bring us back, though, Gordon, to, okay, so the plot's disrupted. The arrest has been made in the UK. You need to charge them.
Yeah.
This gets back to that central question of why was MI5 waiting? And what were they waiting for? Because now you have to go through an entire legal process in order to put these guys away.
Yeah. And it's worth just reflecting on that because they had a big wall chart at the police headquarters. And every time they got a piece of evidence which could be recorded against that defendant, they would note it on this wall chart to try and build enough for each suspect until they got the threshold to charge them. And the problem is they're under time pressure because you can only detain people. It's just been raised, I think, from 14 to 28 days before you could charge people. So you're now able to do searches of premises and of people's phones and all those kind of things and try and collect evidence and interview them to get together their story. But you've got a lot of defendants. We talked about a couple of dozen being arrested. And the police are saying, long hours of fatigue, endless trips to fast food joints, probably more Monster Munch, because they're trying to see how many of these people they can actually build a case against. And in some cases, the evidence is pretty good. You've got the USB stick that Ali had, with the flight times. In Sarwar's house, you find hidden in the roof of the garage was suicide martyrdom videos. It takes a full week to find Sarwar's suitcase, which he'd hidden in the woods. Remember, he struggled to...
His hole.
Yeah.
He finally got around to hiding it well.
I think he put it in a fallen tree trunk in the end because he struggled so much with digging. And they're going to find the peroxide, but that's going to take a week to find. But the problem is, this is where they've got a problem in doing this. And I think the problems caused by that early arrest are borne out in the trials that come. Because you'd think, and I think I found this fascinating looking back on it, you'd think it would be easy to get convictions in this case. But actually, it's not. One of the problems is no actual bombs have yet been built. So you've had them talking about it, having to do all these things, but Sawa hadn't concentrated the hydrogen peroxide. You don't have a workable bomb. And that was one of the things I think the police and MI5 were hoping they'd get by waiting a bit longer till you got something. Then you've got the fact that the men, as we talked about, had been surveillance aware. Rauf had warned them. They're always speaking in code about plans. There was never that one explicit line which says, we're making a bomb, which is going to take down an aircraft.
He stared at the pinhole camera.
Yeah, and said, that's my plan.
In the ceiling of his house, and gave the plan. I guess also, they do have the martyrdom videos, right?
Yeah, but even there, they claim they're going to be propaganda after some demonstrative act. So they claim they're going to do something like a public demonstration.
Rhythmic dance.
Well, you want to believe that. But and that was the point of the videos, was then the statement to that. The problems of evidence are really clear here. And there was a lot of skepticism about the case. It seemed extraordinary at the time. And so they don't get as many charged or even the verdicts they expected. Initially, 2008, 8 men on trial, only 3, Ali, Sawa, and Tanveer Hussain, are found guilty of conspiracy to murder. And the jury then can't reach a verdict on the specific charge of plotting to blow up an aircraft. So in 2009, they go back for another trial where they are convicted of conspiracy to kill by blowing up an aircraft. Another person convicted of conspiracy to murder. Jury deadlocks against others. 2 others convicted of conspiracy to murder, but not the airliners. And then there's a third trial in 2010 where 3 additional men were found guilty of conspiracy to murder. So you can see there that it takes multiple trials to get convictions of some of the men who'd been arrested. And we should say anyone wasn't found guilty is obviously, there's no allegations against them, he says legally. But there was real anger and shock from the UK side when they don't get the guilty verdicts first time. And some of them blame the Americans. They do. They kind of go, the fact we didn't get these verdicts was because we didn't have those extra 2-3 days to really have them bang to rights, as it were.
And Jose Rodriguez, I think it's fair to say in his memoir, Hard Measures, sort of doesn't care. Is that right?
I think that's a fair way.
He wrote, "The Liquids plot saga turned out to be emblematic of my CIA career. If there was a common thread during my lengthy time at the agency, it was that no good deed went unpunished. The Liquid plot incident further drove home to me the importance of swift action, of nimble decision-making, and of being able to hold and interrogate key terrorist suspects ourselves without relying on surrogates who have different and uncertain agendas."
Wow. There's a call for unilateral action. I think that is a sign of where the tensions were when it came to counterterrorism. And Jose Rodriguez, who of course had triggered that arrest of Rashid Rauf.
The weird saga of Rashid Rauf, the mastermind of this attack, does not end there.
Oh, no. It is a kind of weird, wild story. He's arrested 2006 at the instigation, perhaps, of the CIA. Remember, he gave a false name, but the search of his room reveals a passport he'd used to flee the UK in 2002. He's also got other passports in different names, but with his photo, 1 British, 1 South African, 5 mobile phones, stun guns, 29 small bottles of hydrogen peroxide.
It again feels
a little bit suspicious.
Pretty damning.
He's initially held in military detention. This is important. And now this is where the first bit of murkiness comes. He'll later claim he was tortured for 2 weeks before being hooded, taken from a prison, put on a plane, flown for about 3 hours to another prison, where he will claim he was questioned for 2 days by British intelligence officers. Now, the Brits and Americans, meanwhile, say they never had access to him. Jose Rodriguez of the CIA says, they refused to hand him over to the Brits and insisted that any questions we or the British had for Rauf be funneled through the ISI. Happy as we were to have Rauf off the streets, he was not under our control. So the Brits and the Americans say, we did not access him. Rauf will later say, I was tortured and the Brits were there, which he would say, but, that's an interesting question.
At that point, 2006, it's almost impossible for me to imagine a British intelligence officer being there.
Yeah.
while
he's being
he's
tortured,
being tortured.
and knowing.
Don't you think?
Because already by then, the whole rendition torture thing is a thing in Britain. The complicity with the US, with other... But, he's a top suspect.
You could certainly pass questions
Yeah.
to the ISI to put to Rauf.
Well, we should be clear that the Brits and Americans say we did not have access to him. And it's quite interesting why. Because Rauf himself later claims that Pakistani ISI get very nervous about him. And the reason is that they find out that he trained in Kashmir as a jihadist. If you remember, Rauf had been kind of motivated by Kashmir. He'd also married into jihadist groups. And the problem is these are Kashmiri jihadist groups whom ISI and Pakistani had quite deep connections with because they'd use them as surrogates against India. And so there is this issue that the ISI might have gone, having picked him up, maybe having realized if he talks to the Brits and the Americans or gets out, he's going to point the finger at us as having perhaps supported some of the groups who he was associated with, who trained with, that whole issue of how Pakistan's complicated relationship with these particularly groups which had their roots in Kashmir, but which became allied to Al-Qaeda. So you can see that would be awkward. And so it feels quite plausible that the ISI, Pakistan, are worried that letting the Brits and Americans talk to him would lead to some blame coming to them for having had links. And he's very well connected through marriage to these jihadist groups. So it is also plausible to me that the ISA were like, this guy, we've got a problem with him. We don't want people to talk to him.
Yeah. And maybe we the ISI, don't actually want him in custody.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where things get really crazy because Rauf's family file a petition in Pakistan's High Court questioning his detention. He's moved from army to police custody. 3 months after his capture, Pakistan moved to drop terrorism charge against him, allegedly for lack of evidence. They're still holding him on some counts to do with false identities and explosives that they found with him. There's talk maybe about extraditing him to the UK on the original murder charge, 2002. Here's the crucial day. December 15th, 2007, he's being transferred for a court appearance. Now, here's one story of what happens. Rauf arrives at court in Islamabad around midday. After the appearance is over, his uncle talks to the two police...
Not the murdered uncle.
No. Good point. A different uncle talks to two of Rauf's police escorts. Rauf's uncle convinces them to ride in his car instead of the police van. Back to the prison. So the four men, Rauf, his uncle, and the two policemen, leave the courthouse with Rauf's uncle driving.
He's driving. Rauf's uncle is driving the policeman. Yeah.
So as I said, this is one account. They're on the road around 3 p.m, well past lunchtime. Everyone's hungry. So Rauf asks his guards if they could stop at a McDonald's. Rauf's uncle generously offers to pay for everyone's McDonald's. The constables agreed. It's then afternoon, prayer time. Rauf and his uncle asked to make a further stop at a mosque in Rawalpindi, which is just outside Islamabad, on the road to the prison on the way back. Rauf enters the mosque with his uncle, but the cops are asked to stay in the car. His leg shackles are taken off. The police wait 20 minutes, and then he suddenly doesn't come back. Amazing. 2.5 hours later, senior police chiefs are told
2.5 hours.
There are no messages on the police radio alerting anyone about it. And the caretaker of the mosque says he never saw any manhunt in the area. What do you think?
Well, I also like this detail, which is his lawyer. Rashid Rauf's lawyer will say he was told of his client's escape hours before it actually happened.
And also predicted his client would eventually be dead.
Well, that will prove it. Yeah.
So there are other versions of this story which have him escaping earlier in the day, right after the court hearing. There's all of these stories that one police officer's phone pings off a cell tower off the route they were talking about, and he's actually calling the other officer when they're both supposed to be with him. There's a British diplomatic cable which says that a probe concludes that he fled with the collusion of the police and some militants from one of these kind of groups, JEM. So there's a bit of a debate about how far there's an official role in his escape. Because, of course, as we said, he could have said a lot about Pakistani complicity supporting groups. The fact he's linked to 7/7 and he's linked to groups backed by Pakistan. So one theory is ISI organized the escape and then blamed the police officers. Others and people I've spoken to say it was just money changing hands and the police officers being bought off. But either way, he's gone.
Well, and he goes back to his old ways of terrorist planning.
That's right back to the tribal
back
areas.
to it. And I guess, I mean, he continues, I mean, by late 2008, he's involved in 3 new Al-Qaeda plots to attack the West,
including one against New York, a suicide bombing on the New York subway that's being planned for 2009, which the FBI eventually bust.
A plot against Manchester.
Yeah.
A plot against somewhere in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
So all over the place. And I guess, though, by the summer of 2008, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is really starting to break down.
Yeah.
And the U.S. is pushing to do much more unilateral operations, I think we could say.
Which some have reported as being drone strikes.
Which some press outlets have reported ended up becoming a massive predator campaign in the tribal areas. And is, the CIA really, I think, we're obviously still in liaison with ISI.
Yeah.
But rely much less on the Pakistanis to deal with the counterterrorism situation inside Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking a lot about liaison here, mainly about US-UK liaison, but here with the US-Pakistan liaison, it's fundamentally changing, isn't it? Because of the frustrations we were talking about on both sides. The US is suddenly like, we're just gonna use allegedly predator drones to kill those Al-Qaeda commanders and do our own thing. And there's all kinds of other tensions between the US strike. And eventually, November 22nd, 2008, they come for Rashid Rauf, or at least we think they do. There's a drone strike on a mud and brick structure in North Waziristan in the tribal areas. Hits a compound of a Taliban commander, killing him, but also an Al-Qaeda bomb maker, and also, it's thought, Rashid Rauf. Now, there are people in Pakistan think he escaped. Some reports, as ever, we've had this with so many of these characters, that he's still alive, he's still wanted. So he's never quite conclusively identified. But other people I've spoken to seem pretty confident that they got him and that he's dead.
Yeah, I think we can say that he's dead.
I think we can say he's dead.
Right. Reliable sources have told the rest is classified that Rashid Rauf has passed.
He's passed. That's what we're led to believe, as his lawyer predicted when he escaped. So he met the end that was deserved for a man who plotted some pretty awful terrorist attacks, because of course, this one didn't come off, but some like 7/7 did. And this was a guy responsible for it.
I was struck as we're going through this, that this plot could have dramatically reshaped the transatlantic relationship, led to the death of thousands and thousands of people, had a massive economic impact, and it also seems like it's just out of another era. I guess it's kind of, in some ways, the sort of high watermark of this Al-Qaeda plotting against the US and the UK that's coming out of Pakistan, or getting pretty close to it.
I think that's exactly right. 9/11 obviously is the big moment, but in those years afterwards, out of the tribal areas, Al-Qaeda was able to recruit and was still able to organize big plots. I mean, it was able to organize this big plot with sending people back and forth, with organizing bombs, something more ambitious than 9/11, and still focused with that 9/11 feel, I think, on airplanes. That's one of the interesting things about it. But yes, I think this was the high watermark. And after that, you see the attrition, partly because of those alleged CIA drone strikes.
But it's true, though.
It's true.
The safe haven in Pakistan
diminished,
gives space
to plot and organize. And 2007, 2008, that starts to diminish,
to go away.
And the Al-Qaeda operational leadership is basically droned into disappearing. It's that thing every few months, the latest planner was being killed from Al-Qaeda. So their ability to do those big plots, I think you're right, this is the high watermark. This is the peak. And very fortunately, it didn't come off, because it would have been absolutely enormous if it had come off. I mean, really, really, as I said, in some ways bigger than 9/11, perhaps. Maybe less of a shock than 9/11, because you'd had 9/11. But in terms of the consequences for US, for UK, for counterterrorism, it would have been just massive.
Yeah. I think it also, as we've teed up and alluded to throughout the series, this story says something, I think, important about the nature of the US-UK intelligence relationship. Because throughout the story, you see the tremendous intimacy between the two services, but also I think how some of that intimacy can create enough surface area so there's friction. If there are even slight differences, not even strategic differences, because I think with the Pakistanis, in that relationship between CIA and ISI, there are big strategic differences in your priorities that leads to a kind of a double game. Here, in between the US and the UK, you don't see that, but you do see still these opportunities for there to be mistrust injected into the relationship because we might not see eye to eye on how a counterterrorism investigation should run or sort of at what speed it should go.
That's right. I think it's always said, we have a really close relationship in lots of intelligence sharing, counterterrorism liaison is really close. That's true, but it's also more complicated than that. Because even if whatever the tensions might be today, where you've got strategic political differences, even back then 20 years ago, this is a reminder that we've had some of those differences in the past. In that point, it was tactics over counterterrorism. Were you going to use rendition and things like that, but also how much were you willing to let things run? How much risk you're going to take? There are tensions in the relationship. There's no point pretending there aren't. This is a good example of that. And of the Americans effectively throwing their weight around. I think at the end of the day, they are the bigger partner in this relationship, and they can do that. And they did that in this case, and the Brits basically had to deal with it. But that's the reality of it. It's no point pretending there isn't friction in these relationships.
And that power imbalance is still the same today, I would argue. I think what is different and what is maybe an interesting question to kind of close this on is, have the strategic priorities changed a bit? Because 20 years ago, both countries are really in lockstep on
Bush and
the
Blair are in the
geopolitical
same,
situation, right?
Bush and Blair are close.
Exactly. And now, are we in a different world where there are strategic differences over the way you resist the Russians in Ukraine, or Greenland, or tariffs,
or China,
where what I think about is, are we in a situation where some of those strategic differences actually could go down and kind of get into the depths of the relationship and affect how it operates at a working level, so that there's more mistrust, more friction, or disconnection in some cases? Now, that's a lot easier said than done, but I do wonder about it because we're not in the world of 2006 anymore in this liaison relationship.
No, I think that's exactly right. And we both talk to people who are, who know this relationship very well, including at the moment. The people I speak to say, on an operational level, things are still going. The US, UK, the people operationally, where they're dealing with counterterrorism or where they're dealing with the Middle East, they're still talking, working with each other. But you're right, the kind of top level strategic tension is there, which is the difference from this time. And you do wonder when you speak to people, how long will it take before the strategic difference between the US and UK, the wider political and policy difference, starts to feed down into the intelligence relationship, and where the points of tension will start to come, where you'll be like, actually, can we share with them about this thing or that thing? I'm not sure it's breaking down yet.
No.
But you wonder how sustainable keeping that close relationship is going to be in this very different environment where, however much they try and pretend they're not, there are big differences, between the two sides.
That's right. And 20 years on, you haven't been able to take liquids on planes.
Although they're starting to lift them.
Although it's starting to change.
Yeah. So I think that's a good place to end, because it's 20-year legacy
20 years
of this story and of MI5 busting this plot, which we're only now, it feels, getting over.
That's right. Well, I think that's the right place to end this story, Gordon. We'd be remiss, of course, if we didn't say, go on. You've listened to this whole series. Jump in and join the Declassified Club. Do that at therestisclassified.com. We'll also say we have a really exciting series coming up next, which is we are going to be digging deep into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, actually getting beyond the politics of it to say, what did the Russians do and not do in an attempt to affect that election? So we're going to be digging into that, and we'll also have a really exciting mini-series for members looking at the connections, again, in a really in-depth and fact-based way, looking at the connections between Trump and his team and Russia, and again, getting beyond the noise of the politics to say, what's actually going on. It's going to be a good series.
It's going to be a good series. Looking forward to that one. But in the meantime,
We'll see you next time.
see you then.